Planet of the Apes is one of those franchises where I know a lot of people who know about it, but few that have ever actually delved into it. It doesn't have the same level of prestige as Star Wars, Star Trek, or even Alien. The original 68 film is. I don't know if it's one of the best science fiction films ever made, but it's definitely one of the more interesting ones out there. It's thematically dense, but it's also pretty accessible, which I think summarizes the franchise in general. So this video is going to cover my personal ranking of the films from 1968 to present, 2017. We're going from worst to best this time around. Let's talk movies. This film has so much good going for it, and yet it somehow manages to not work on an epic scale. You've got Tim Burton, who had yet to make a bad film at this point in his career. You've got Rick Baker doing the makeup effects. You've got a great cast, for the most part. Tim Roth, Helena Bonham Carter, Michael Clarke Duncan, Paul Giamatti. Mark Wahlberg is... he's way out of his depth. I also don't like the action in this film. Call me crazy, but gorillas on horseback, armed with rifles, is way cooler than a wave of apes just beating on humans with their fists. But what do I know? I'm just a layman critic. Also, the ending blows. It makes no sense, and seems like a pointless effort to top the original's twist. I almost rated this one at the bottom. Not that this movie is bad, it's actually quite entertaining and pretty funny at times, but it's so unlike the rest of the films. The method in which this story is made possible also really strains one's suspension of disbelief. There's no action in this one. The best comparison I can make it to is Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Its focus is on fish-out-of-water comedy, though it gets dark toward the end. Dr. Hassline is my favorite villain of the series. He's not evil per se, but he's less than scrupulous when it comes to trying to save mankind from an eventual catastrophe. It's all the more strange when you realize that you're inadvertently cheering for this very outcome as you cheer for Cornelius and Zero to survive. Chew on that one. I really like this one. It takes some daring risks with where the story goes, which I can respect. I'm on the fence as to whether or not I like the mutant psychics who serve as the main antagonists. It could be argued that this move borders on jumping the shark, but the idea of a subterranean cult worshipping a nuclear bomb is kind of cool, if a bit out there. Charlton Heston is sadly MIA through most of the film, disappearing at the beginning and reappearing to destroy the planet. Instead, we get James Franciscus as fellow time traveler Brent. While not as cool as Taylor, Brent is a more likable protagonist. Plus, we get more Nova. Hot! I'm sure some fans might take issue with my ranking this over the previous two movies mentioned, but I'll explain myself. First, we get to see Roddy McDowall play Caesar as ruler of the apes. He's no longer a victim or a slave, so we get a new side to see of the character. Second, it's a return to the world we immersed ourselves in with the first two movies. Lastly, of the original 5 movies, it probably has the most action. Its two weak spots are its absence of thematic depth and the lack of scale that the preceding movies shared. The first two movies had wide shots of deserts and canyons. This one shows its diminished budget. Still, it's a fun movie to watch and probably gets more hate than it rightfully deserves. When I first saw previews for this one, I admit I wasn't stoked. Replacing practical effects with motion capture is still chafing for me, but the technology is getting better and more convincing with each sequel. The story itself is pretty cool. It delves into the science of how the apes come to evolve. It's very reminiscent of a Michael Crichton novel in some ways. Not really any action in this one except towards the end, though the movie is entertaining enough that it never bothers me. James Franco and John Lithgow both pull great performances. Frida Pinto isn't given much to do, unfortunately. And of course, Andy Serkis brings life to a motion capture Caesar in a way that only he can do. Where Rise of the Planet of the Apes was set up, this one is much closer to the earlier films. Mankind is dwindling, and the apes are in their element. Caesar and his kin are fleshed out more and given some individual personalities. My personal favorite is Maurice. I didn't get much attachment to the human characters in this one, except for maybe Gary Oldman, who is criminally underutilized in this film. It's still a solid entry, and definitely gives the fans what they want. By far the darkest in the whole franchise, it's also one of my favorites. Roddy McDowall's transition from sheltered young chimp into a revolutionary
leads you to sympathize with the apes' plight. The production design, which is that of a futuristic police state teeming with overprivileged humans, adds to the film's overall bleakness. The film's biggest problem is the severe drop in quality with the makeup effects. Aside from Caesar and maybe Lisa, the realism and amount of expression allowed for the actors is pretty limited. They look downright B-movie in spots, but the climax more than makes up for it, in my opinion. I only wish they had gone with the original ending, which took a much darker turn for the character of Caesar. This one also has my favorite line in all the movies. Do. The title is misleading, as it does give one the impression that the story is about an all-out war between humans and apes. That's not the case. There is lots of action, though. Caesar goes from Moses figure to Christ figure and back during the story, and he's put through the absolute worst circumstances we've seen for him. The drama and performances are at their absolute peak, heightened by flawless CGI. Woody Harrelson gets to channel Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now, playing a villain that we can't decide whether he's insane or just pure evil. This movie is the best yet in the new series. The one that started everything is still the strongest of the franchise, nearly 50 years on. There are a couple weird things here and there. There's this one fast-moving shot across the water that looks like it belongs in a Sam Raimi film. And then there's this weird zoom on a tiny American flag, followed by Charlton Heston cackling, that leaves you scratching your head and wondering what the director was thinking. The cast is great. Charlton Heston's character Taylor is such a prick. Yet, his situation leads you to sympathize with him when you may not otherwise. Roddy McDowall plays Cornelius for the first time. His rather sing-songy voice offers some whimsy to the character and endears him to the audience. Kim Hunter plays Zira, his feisty wife and colleague. Maurice Evans plays Dr. Zayas, the orangutan villain. Like many of the antagonists in this series, his morals lie in shades of gray. And then we have Linda Harrison serving as eye candy in the mute native called Nova. This movie is probably one of the few instances that I can think of offhand where the film adaptation is superior to the novel. The two are very different. I much prefer the overall story of the former. It has better pacing and is much more exciting. And that ending, oof, what a kick to the gonads that must have been in 1968.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlefellows. If you've only seen a couple of these movies, I recommend giving them all at least one viewing. I don't think you'll regret it. I plan on doing a review for the latest film. If it's not up on the same day as this video, it will be within the next day or two. Hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.